Why did Joshua have no children? Joshua, one of the greatest leaders in Israel's history, was the successor of Moses and the man chosen by God to lead the Hebrew people in the conquest of the Promised Land. His life and story are primarily recorded in the books of Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and of course, the book of Joshua. But there is a mystery surrounding this leader's life. He was a man of victories, but what do we know about his personal life? Despite his divine calling, did he find time to start a family? Did he have children to continue his legacy? That's what we're going to explore in this video. Before discovering whether Joshua had children, we need to understand more about his journey and what made him one of the most influential leaders in Israel. Joshua was born in Egypt during the period of Hebrew slavery under Pharaoh's rule. He belonged to the tribe of Ephraim, one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and was the son of Nun, a direct descendant of Joseph. Although the Bible does not provide many details about his childhood, we can deduce that he grew up witnessing the suffering of his people and the oppressive power of the Egyptians. His original name was Hoshea, which means salvation in Hebrew. However, Moses changed his name to Joshua, meaning the Lord is salvation. Numbers 13:16. This name change was a foreshadowing of the role he would play as the leader, who would bring salvation to the people of Israel by guiding them into the Promised Land. In Exodus 33:11, Joshua is described as a young man chosen by Moses as his personal assistant. Earlier, in Exodus 17, we learn that Moses entrusted him with the command of the Israelite troops that fought against the Amalekite raiders at Rephidim. When Joshua left Egypt, he was already over 40 years old. This leads some scholars to consider the possibility that he had received military training in Pharaoh's army. Joshua served as Moses' direct assistant when he received the law on Mount Sinai. He also accompanied Moses every time he went to the tent of meeting to hear from the Lord. Exodus 24:13, 32:17, 33:11, Numbers 21:28. Undoubtedly, this was a period of great learning for Joshua. He learned to wait on the Lord and to be a faithful worshipper. Moreover, he acquired character traits from Moses, such as patience, humility, and leadership. Joshua was also appointed as the representative of the tribe of Ephraim and was one of the 12 spies sent to explore the land of Canaan and its inhabitants. After the reconnaissance mission, out of all the spies, only Joshua and Caleb defended the idea that the Israelites should proceed with the invasion of Canaan, understanding that the land was very good. At that time, Caleb was older and had greater leadership, which explains why he is sometimes mentioned alone in this context. However, the biblical narrative clearly indicates Joshua's participation in the reconnaissance mission and his support for Caleb's recommendations. The actions of Caleb and Joshua were much more than a military report. In reality, they were a clear demonstration of faith in God's promise concerning that land. The other 10 unbelieving spies died of a plague before the Lord. Numbers 14:36-38. Joshua was officially chosen as Moses' successor in the plains near the Jordan River. When Moses realized he would die before entering Canaan, he designated Joshua as the new leader of Israel, following the Lord's command. Joshua's leadership was coordinated with the priesthood of Eleazar. Numbers 27:12-23, Deuteronomy 3:21-29. Moses solemnly bestowed honor and authority upon Joshua in front of the entire congregation of Israel. He also laid his hands on him and imparted the spirit of wisdom. Deuteronomy 3:21-29. Publicly, Moses warned Joshua to be courageous and strong so that he could fulfill the mission of leading Israel into the land that God had promised. Deuteronomy 31:3-8. In the same chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, we read that when Moses and Joshua went to the tent of meeting, God directly commissioned Joshua. Deuteronomy 31:14-23. Later, after Moses' death, God reiterated the command given specifically to Joshua. In doing so, he renewed his promises and encouraged him on the eve of the invasion of Canaan. Joshua 1:1-9. After Moses' death, Joshua was responsible for leading the people of Israel in the conquest of the land promised by God. Of all the Israelites who left Egypt with Moses, only Joshua, Caleb, and those under 20 years old were allowed to enter Canaan. Numbers 26:65, 32:12, Deuteronomy 1:34-40. At the beginning of his leadership, Joshua faced two major challenges. First, he needed to lead the people across the Jordan River. Then, he had to defeat the Canaanite army that stood before them. Joshua sent 2 spies to gather intelligence on the fortress of Jericho. These spies received cooperation from Rahab, a resident of Jericho. Joshua also instructed them to keep the mission secret to prevent a repeat of what had happened with the previous mission when Moses sent 12 spies. On that occasion, 10 unbelieving spies discouraged the people. God's actions in favor of Israel caused the inhabitants of those lands to be filled with fear. In chapter 3 of the book of Joshua, we read how God supernaturally stopped the waters of the Jordan when the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant stepped into the river. Thus the people of Israel crossed over on dry ground to Jericho. Joshua demonstrated his complete trust in God, obeying each tactic that God gave him to achieve victory in the land of Canaan. Many of these tactics from a human perspective were completely unusual. This was the case in the conquest of Jericho, where the priests and the people were commanded to march around the city. On the 7th day, when the priests blew the trumpets and the people shouted loudly, the walls of Jericho collapsed. With the exception of Achan, the Israelite army obeyed the command not to loot the city's ruins for personal gain. Achan's actions brought severe consequences, not only for himself, but also for the people of Israel. As a result, the Israelites suffered defeat in their first attempt to conquer the city of Ai, Joshua 7. In the second attack on Ai, described in Joshua 8, we see the great skill and strategy that characterized Joshua's military campaigns. On that occasion, the Israelites set an ambush. They feigned a retreat and deceived the army of Ai, luring the enemy soldiers out of their fortified city, ultimately defeating them. Throughout the book of Joshua, we find examples of the incredible military actions led by him. One such example was the nighttime march from Gilgal to relieve the siege of Gibeon. During the battle described in chapter 10, we see how divine providence accompanied Israel. For example, the hailstorm sent by the Lord killed more enemies than the Israelite army did with the sword. Additionally, in the well-known episode where the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the Israelites had avenged themselves upon their enemies, that was a day that was never repeated in all of history. Joshua 10:12-14. Many people try to find a possible biblical error in this passage. They argue that the error lies in the fact that the text describes the sun and the moon standing still, instead of the earth's rotation stopping. However, this discussion is completely absurd. The Bible uses the language of the observer. This means that even in our days, in the 21st century, if the Earth's rotation were to stop from the observer's point of view, that is, from the perspective of someone on Earth, the sun would appear to stand still in the sky. Joshua succeeded in subduing all the land of Canaan and distributed the territories among the tribes of Israel. Afterward, the Israelites gradually settled in the land and built their structures. This occurred during the period from the time of the Judges to the reign of David. But one of the biggest questions about Joshua's life concerns his marriage and children. Who was Joshua's wife in the Bible? The fact that the name of Joshua's wife is not mentioned has led to much speculation. However, a careful analysis of the cultural and social context of the time, along with a significant statement made by Joshua himself, suggests that he was probably married. When presenting Joshua, the Bible primarily focuses on his role as a military and spiritual leader of Israel. There is hardly any information about his personal or family life, except for the mention of his father, Nun, and his tribe, Ephraim, as previously stated. This lack of details has sparked many speculations over the centuries regarding his marital life, particularly the possibility that Joshua married Rahab, the woman from Jericho who was saved because of her faith in the God of Israel. Therefore, the theory that Rahab was Joshua's wife gains relevance, especially in some Jewish traditions. According to this perspective, Rahab, after helping the Israelite spies sent by Joshua to Jericho, integrated into the people of Israel and married him, marking a union that symbolically represented the inclusion of foreign nations into God's covenant. However, this hypothesis faces two fundamental issues. First, the Old Testament does not directly confirm this union, and second, the New Testament presents Rahab in a different light. The New Testament narrative provides a detailed perspective on Rahab's life after her conversion to the God of Israel. In the Gospel of Matthew 1:5, we see that Rahab married Salmon, and from that marriage, she became an ancestor of King David, forming a genealogical line that would culminate in Jesus. Additionally, in the book of Hebrews 11:31, Rahab is described as a prostitute, highlighting her spiritual transformation and the significance of her faith. Rahab left behind her life in Jericho, and through her conversion and new life among the Israelites, became a key figure in Christ's genealogy, representing redemption and God's transformative power. This understanding, more widely accepted among Christian scholars, reinforces the idea that although Joshua and Rahab's paths cross in the biblical narrative, they follow distinct trajectories. While Joshua remains the leader guiding the people in the conquest of the Promised Land, Rahab stands as a living testimony of faith and redemption. This distinction not only preserves the uniqueness of each person's mission, but also highlights the diversity of God's plans for those who trust in him. Another speculation would be that Joshua might have married Araunah. Many people have recently wondered who Araunah was in the Bible, and where exactly we can find any reference to a romance between Araunah and Joshua. This curiosity arose mainly because of a telenovela produced by a television network, in which Araunah and Joshua are portrayed as a couple. First of all, it is important to say that this video is not intended to criticize the plot of the series, or judge those who choose to watch it. The truth is that, for those who know the Bible, it is already very clear that it is extremely difficult to find a production that is entirely faithful to biblical stories. Most of these works, whether soap operas, movies, series, or theater plays, are adaptations that often stray far from what is actually written in the Bible, turning the narrative into fiction. To be honest, I don't recall any production that would pass unscathed through a serious theological analysis. Therefore, if your intention is to watch a movie, soap opera, or series to learn more about the Bible, don't. Nothing replaces reading and studying the scriptures. Whenever watching any title about a biblical story, it is always necessary to be aware of this. So, who was Araunah? The answer to this question depends on the context. Araunah can be a mythological god, or even a comic book character, depending on which Araunah we are referring to. In Hindu tradition, Araunah represents the personification of dawn. In Hittite mythology, Araunah is a sea god. In another context, Araunah is also a superhero in DC Comics. You might be wondering, what about the Bible? Regarding the Bible, the answer is very straightforward. There is no mention of Araunah. There is no reference to that name anywhere in the Bible. Additionally, records of Jewish traditions do not mention a character named Araunah, whether in a romance with Joshua or with any other person. The only name that resembles Araunah in the Bible is a character called Araunah, also known as Ornan, mentioned in 1 Chronicles 21:15 and 2 Samuel 24:16. Araunah was a Jebusite who owned part of Mount Moriah and sold that land to King David, who used the place to build an altar to the Lord. Although the name Araunah may look similar to Aruna, its origin and meaning are quite different, and there is no connection to the character in the soap opera, Rahab, Aruna, Anna, who is also mentioned in the series, or any other name attributed to Joshua's wife, has no biblical foundation. In his final speech to the people of Israel, Joshua not only calls the nation to renew their covenant with God, but also makes a personal and powerful declaration. "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Joshua 24:15. This phrase carries special weight. When Joshua mentions "my house," he is naturally referring not only to a physical home, but also to his family unit, something that, in Israeli culture, traditionally included a wife and children. This expression suggests that he led a family, and that just as he guided the people, he also directed his own family in faith and in the ways of the Lord. Additionally, it is important to note that for an Israelite of that period, especially a leader of Joshua's stature, it was almost unthinkable not to marry. Marriage was widely encouraged among the Hebrews as a means of continuing faith and the covenant with God through generations. Family life was the foundation of the Israelite community, where parents had the responsibility to teach the law and pass on spiritual values to their children. Thus, it is reasonable to conclude that Joshua, although the Bible does not explicitly mention it, probably had a wife and children who made up his house. When the time came for Joshua to step down, he gathered all the tribes of Israel. In his farewell speech, he urged the children of Israel to renew their commitment to God's covenant. He also warned the people to keep the Lord's commandments and to remain faithful. Joshua died at the age of 110 years and was buried in his land near Timnath-Serah, which is in Mount Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. Joshua witnessed God's power from Egypt through the wilderness until finally reaching the Promised Land in Canaan. His story and his example as a God-fearing man certainly teach us many lessons. Some key points about this remarkable man of God are: Joshua proved to be an excellent leader while serving under Moses. Joshua possessed all the qualities of a true leader. Courage was a constant mark in his life. Joshua was brave from his youth at the beginning of Israel's journey through the wilderness to the great battles he led in Canaan. He was always attentive to the commands of his divine commander. He had the clear certainty that his success in leading the people depended entirely on his obedience to the Lord. No matter how unusual they seemed, Joshua never questioned the orders given by God. His strategies were always planned under the direction of God's word. Joshua was a man of his word who preserved his honor. This trait of his character can be observed in the fulfillment of the covenant made with Rahab. Joshua was a man completely devoted to the law of God. The word of the Lord filled his mind and heart. He was a leader respected by the nation of Israel, and the people trusted his decisions. The Israelites could see in his life the presence and approval of God. The example of his impeccable conduct, his fear of and obedience to God, did not end with his death. Joshua's story continued to influence the people of Israel during the time of the elders who lived long after him. I hope this study has enriched you with knowledge. Let me know in the comments below if you knew Joshua's story and from which country you are watching. I would love to know. Please support my ministry by subscribing to the channel, leaving a like, and sharing this video with more people. I greatly appreciate you watching until the end. See you in the next video. God bless you.